Imagine lying in a sterile hospital bed, the smell of bleach burning your nostrils, while your own brother whispers to your parents in the hallway that you're better off dead, so he can liquidate your inheritance to fund his reckless lifestyle. While I was fighting for my life after a brutal surgery, my family wasn't praying for me, they were signing away my children's future. My father looked at the floor, my mother looked at her watch, and my brother looked at my bank account. They thought the anesthesia had pulled me under, but I heard every word. I heard the laughter. I heard them call me a necessary sacrifice. They didn't just steal my money, they tried to erase my existence while my twins were in the waiting room asking when mommy was coming home. They left me with nothing but a mountain of medical debt and a heart turned to cold, black stone. They thought they buried me, but they forgot I was the one who knew where all the bodies were hidden. And that was the moment I knew, the real revenge begins now. If you're drawn to intense, true-feeling stories of betrayal, revenge, and justice that cuts deep, make sure you subscribe to this channel. These stories only get darker from here. The rain in Seattle doesn't just fall, it colonizes the air, turning the skyline into a blurred watercolor of gray and neon. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the corner office on the 54th floor, watching the droplets race down the glass like tears on a ghost's face. Today was my first day as the CEO of Sterling Vance, the largest software conglomerate in the country, a position I had clawed toward through 5 years of silence, sweat, and strategic shadows. The air in the cabin was thick with the scent of expensive leather and the humming silence of absolute power. I sat in the mahogany chair, my fingers tracing the edge of a digital recorder hidden in my breast pocket, the same one that held the jagged, recorded ghosts of my family's betrayal from that hospital hallway years ago. I hadn't seen them since the day I walked out of the ward with a cane and a blood oath. I had changed my name, reconstructed my life, and waited. My assistant, Marcus, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his tailored suit, fluttered around the room, obsessed with the optics of my arrival. Every movement he made was calculated, an endless dance of corporate sycophancy that I found repulsive because I knew the venom that usually hid behind such professional smiles. Then, the heavy oak door creaked open, and the silence was broken by the rhythmic, wet slosh of a mop. An elderly woman, her back curved like a question mark and her hands gnarled from decades of labor, shuffled in. She didn't look up, she just focused on the patch of floor near my desk. She was a ghost in a blue uniform, the kind of person people like my brother would walk over without breaking stride. Her presence was a stark contrast to the chrome and glass perfection of the room. In a moment of physical fatigue, perhaps a tremor in her aged wrists, her grip failed. The plastic bucket tipped, and a wave of gray, soapy water rushed across the hand-woven Persian carpet, soaking into the fibers. Marcus's face contorted into a mask of aristocratic fury. He stepped forward, his shoes clicking like gunfire against the hardwood border, and began to scream at the woman, his voice vibrating with a cruelty that felt eerily familiar. "How dare you come in here? Do you have any idea what this office represents? Do you know how much this carpet costs? People like you are a disgrace to our boss's reputation. Get out before I ensure you never work in this city again." The elderly woman shrank, her shoulders shaking, her eyes fixed on the mess as if she could wish the water back into the bucket. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, the way a predator unsheathes its claws. Marcus looked back at me, expecting a nod of approval, a shared moment of elitist disdain. I didn't look at Marcus. I walked around the desk, my designer heels stepping right through the puddle, and I reached down. I took the woman's cold, damp hands in mine and pulled her up from the floor. I felt the calluses on her palms, the history of a life spent serving others. I looked Marcus dead in the eye, my voice a low, vibrating hum that cut through his ego like a razor. "She was my first teacher," I said. Those 4 words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Marcus froze, his mouth agape, realizing he had just insulted the woman who had taught the most powerful woman in the room how to read when her own parents were too busy plotting her downfall. The elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, didn't recognize me at first. How could she? The scrawny, broken girl she had tutored in the back of a public library in a forgotten suburb was gone, replaced by this monolith of industry. Back then, I was the girl who wore the same oversized sweater for weeks, the one who tried to hide the yellowing bruises on my forearms. She had been the only one who saw the truth behind my father's discipline, the only one who noticed when I went 3 days without a meal because my brother, Julian, had lost my lunch money as a game. Mrs. Gable hadn't just taught me phonics, she had taught me that I existed when my own blood was trying to delete me. I dismissed Marcus with a flick of my wrist, a silent command that sent him scurrying out of the room, his career flash-frying in the heat of his own arrogance. I sat Mrs. Gable down in the $10,000 guest chair and told her the truth, that I was the CEO now, and that her days of scrubbing floors were over. I watched the realization wash over her, a mix of pride and disbelief that brought a rare warmth to my chest. But as I looked at the clock, the warmth turned back to ice. The time had come for the final act of a play 5 years in the making. My brother, Julian, had spent the last half-decade building a house of cards, a tech firm called Aura that was bleeding cash and built on intellectual property he had essentially pilfered from our late grandfather's estate, money that was supposed to go to my children. He had been positioning himself for a massive acquisition, desperate to merge Aura with Sterling Vance to hide his embezzlement. He had been negotiating for months with an anonymous board representative via encrypted channels, never suspecting that Ms. Vane was the sister he thought he'd discarded in a New York City ICU. He was coming to this very office in 2 hours. He thought he was arriving to sign a deal that would make him a billionaire and solidify his status as the king of the valley. He didn't know he was walking into a gallows. I spent the next hour preparing the room. I had my tech team patch the building's internal security feed directly into the main monitors of the boardroom, but I kept the audio source separate. I wanted the visual of their arrival to be crisp, a high-definition recording of their downfall. When the elevator pinged, I felt a surge of adrenaline that was almost sickening. Julian stepped out first, draped in a tailored coat that cost more than Mrs. Gable made in a year. His hair was perfectly styled, his smile a practiced masterpiece that didn't reach his predatory eyes. Behind him trailed our parents, my father, still trying to project an aura of patriarchal strength despite the gin blossoms on his cheeks, and my mother, looking like a well-groomed lapdog, her eyes constantly darting around to calculate the net worth of every piece of furniture. They walked into my office with the sickening entitlement of royalty returning to a palace. They didn't recognize me. The sharp bob, the expensive jewelry, the sheer presence of a woman who had stared into the abyss and didn't blink, it masked the ghost they remembered. I sat in the shadows behind my desk, the light from the rain-streaked window silhouetting me. I let them talk. I let Julian launch into his pitch about visionary, software and synergistic growth, terms he used to mask the fact that his company was a hollow shell. I watched my mother admire the art on my walls, her fingers twitching with the urge to price the oil paintings. I watched my father puff out his chest, trying to mirror my posture, unaware he was a caricature of the man he thought he was. He actually had the audacity to comment on the damp spot on the carpet. "You should fire the help, dear," he said, not knowing I was his daughter. Hard to find good people these days. I didn't answer. Instead, I stood up and walked to the console. "I have something you need to hear before we finalize the signatures," I said, my voice sounding like gravel under a boot. I turned on the surround sound speakers. I didn't play a PowerPoint presentation. I played the raw, unedited audio from 5 years ago, the recording I had captured on my phone, which I'd left voice-activated on the bedside table before the brutal surgery they hoped I wouldn't survive. The room was suddenly filled with the rhythmic, haunting sound of a hospital heart monitor, beep, beep, beep. The sound of a life hanging by a thread. Then, Julian's voice cut through the air, sharp, cold, and devoid of any brotherly love. "If she dies today, the trust reverts to us by Friday. Just sign the papers, Dad. She's a lost cause anyway. Think of the Aura launch. We need that capital now, not when she's a vegetable for 20 years. Then my mother's voice, a soft, chilling agreement, the twins can go to boarding school. It's better they don't see her like this. We have to be practical. The room went ice cold. My mother's face turned the color of ash, her hand flying to her throat as if she were choking on her own lies. My father's glass of water slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, the exact same spot where Mrs. Gable's bucket had spilled. The irony was a jagged blade. Julian's mask didn't just slip, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the moment the realization hit him like a physical blow. The scabs of the past were ripped off. I leaned forward into the light, letting it catch the jagged scars on my neck, the physical proof of the surgery they wanted me to fail. The deal is dead, I whispered, the words echoing in the silence. And so is this family. I informed them that I hadn't just been watching them, I had been active. Over the last year, I had quietly bought up their personal debts through various shell companies. I had shadowed their bank accounts, documented the embezzlement from the Children's Trust, and compiled a dossier that would make a RICO prosecutor weep with joy. By tomorrow morning, I continued, every major news outlet and the SEC will have this recording and the forensic accounting of Aura. You didn't come here for a crown, Julian. You came here for an ending. They tried to plead. My mother started to cry, the same crocodile tears she used to get my father to ignore my bruises. My father tried to bluster, to use a paternal tone that died in his throat when I looked at him with eyes that felt nothing. They were escorted out of the building not by my security, but by the NYPD white-collar crime unit I had waiting in the lobby. I stood by the window as the police cruisers pulled away, their blue and red lights dancing on the wet pavement below. The Seattle rain continued to fall, washing the streets, but it could never wash away the memories of that hospital room. I wasn't happy, revenge is a cold meal that leaves you empty, but I was settled. As I turned back to my desk, Mrs. Gable was still there, standing by the door. I walked over, handed her a folder containing the deed to a small house and a pension fund that would ensure she never had to hold a mop again. I owed her that. She taught me to read the world, and today, I finally finished the last chapter. The debt was paid in full.